Turned by Michaela! Lovely cushion header. And Giroud! What a head, son! What a head! Aguero!
Hello and welcome back to the Premier League Trio podcast. My name is Hader and I'm your host as usual today. Today I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Andrew Beasley, who is a freelance journalist and also a Liverpool expert. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How are you looking forward to the new season?
Yeah, it should be really good. Obviously, as you know, I'm a Liverpool fan, so defending the title, which is something they've not had to do for 30 years, just as they hadn't won it for that long. So, yeah, very interesting to see how they get on this year.
Absolutely. I'm a United fan, so for me, I'm hoping, obviously, that the title's not going back to Anfield. But I wanted to get you on because I just wanted to talk more about sort of what's going on at Liverpool in terms of the financial situation, because I think what we saw last season was Liverpool were by far and away the best side in England, clearly winning the title at an absolute canter. And I think that a lot of Liverpool fans that I've been speaking to are quite frustrated because there is that notion. I do think that when you're on top, you've got to improve. You've got to improve the squad. You've got to buy. You've got to keep on moving. Otherwise, you stand still. And obviously, looking around at the other teams in the Premier League, you could look at Chelsea, who have obviously massively invested. I think, look, the gap is so big, so I wouldn't take that into that much consideration, but they will improve. And you're looking at Manchester City, who will improve that defense, which was very leaky. So is it a concern for Liverpool fans that you haven't invested in the squad and improved it as much as you might have wanted to? And what is the financial situation at Liverpool this window?
Well, you probably saw there was a good thread by the Swiss Ramble on Twitter earlier this week, and basically very long thread, very interesting, and I can't pretend to have understood all of it. But the basic gist was Liverpool have spent exactly what they've brought in. Their wage bill has been growing bigger than their revenues have been growing over the last 3 years. And as much as they have headline sort of profit figures, a lot of it has been down to player sales. It's not sort of cash inflow. Apparently they had a 207 million profit, but only 29 million of net cash inflow. So I think there is a bit of a difference between what people see as the money the club has and what they actually have. I mean, in terms of this summer, I think, you know, the idea of strengthening while you're on top makes a lot of sense. But obviously Liverpool have got to where they are now with their sort of chosen business model of waiting for the targets they want and paying an amount that they want to pay for them, and not just buying players for the sake of it. I mean, we definitely saw that a few years ago when their first attempt to buy Virgil van Dijk fell through. All the fans were saying, we just got to buy another defender. They were like, no, we want to wait for this guy. And obviously you can't argue that it hasn't paid off. So I think there may be money available for the right player, but I don't think they're going to just buy players for the sake of it, because it hasn't been their style to date. And there's no reason to think that they'll change from that, because it's worked for them.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to obviously look at the Coutinho money as well. And obviously that was a huge amount that came in. And the way that Liverpool spent it was fantastic. You brought in a world-class goalkeeper, obviously the best centre-back in the world. We haven't seen much of Naby Keita, have we? Is he someone that you expect to have a better season? Because he came very highly rated. I watched him at Leipzig, because I do watch quite a bit of German football. And he was by far and away Leipzig's best player when he was there. And he was probably one of the most exciting midfielders. And he really could be that step forward in that midfield, couldn't he?
The issue with Keita, at least at Liverpool, has always been his fitness rather than his ability. I've actually written an article for the Tompkins Times, which will be out next week, basically looking at his stats over the last couple of years. And his stats have been incredible, sort of top level in Europe, sort of top 20 guys for things like pressing and creating chances and things like this. But he's sort of had two problems, really. He, as I say, hasn't been fit. And also, he's mainly played against the weaker teams. So as much as his stats look great, you have to accept that he hasn't played against the biggest teams very often. But there's no doubt the ability is there. If he can stay fit, I mean, he could, it's a cliche, so-and-so is like a new signing when you don't buy anybody. I mean, I wouldn't go that far because he did contribute little bits and bobs. But clearly, if he can stay fit and can demonstrate his ability, then he is going to add goals and assists from midfield dimension if he can become a sort of regular, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely someone, cliche, he could be like a new thing. And before we go on to Thiago, because I think that's obviously the obvious one, but what other areas would you have liked to have seen Liverpool strengthen? Because obviously that front three is up there with the best around Europe currently, and it's very difficult for Liverpool to go and buy a player, because if you're buying a player, you're pretty much sitting on the bench. You looked at Timo Werner. Is that a player you would have liked to have seen come in if the money was available, or do you think that Liverpool probably need to push maybe perhaps to the fullbacks areas? Because I think the drop down obviously from Trent to Nico Williams looks like a good player, but it's quite a vast drop down. And where else? Because I think before we go on to Thiago, I think that's the obvious area. But do you think that midfield is sustainable to go and win another Premier League title?
Yeah, I mean, just on Werner, I'd have been delighted if he'd have signed. He's clearly a great player, and he looks like he would have been a great Klopp player as well. It is a bit of a shame that didn't happen. I mean, in terms of the improving the squad, I think they could definitely do with another centre-back. Obviously, they're sort of lucky that Van Dijk doesn't seem to get injured, but the other guys do. Gomez and Joel Matip both get injuries. It looks like they're going to rely on Fabinho to cover at centre-back if they need to, which is theoretically fine for a lot of games, but then you miss him in midfield, so you're sort of missing there. So I think that's probably the one area. It was a good idea to buy a left-back as cover for Robertson. I don't know too much about Simcas, but I'm sure he's probably all right as a sort of backup. As you say, Williams can cover for Alexander-Arnold. He can't offer the same level offensively, but then there's not many players around who can. So, Liverpool probably just have to sort of live with that. Up front's interesting because even had they signed Werner, it's hard to know how they would all sort of get their game time, because the front three, as it is, basically plays every game near enough. And I'm sure they wouldn't take kindly to being rested for Werner to play or whatever. I mean, it would obviously be a good problem to have, but it would have been interesting to see how they fit. Whereas guys like an Origi and Brewster, who obviously aren't as good, Origi probably never will be, obviously, but Brewster looks like a talent. They're probably a bit more accepting of a bench role, so it kind of works from that point of view. So I don't think they needed to do huge business, but I mean, like all fans, you kind of want your team to buy more players, don't you? But I think they're in good shape for the season ahead. Because the average age of the squad is decent enough, 27. They didn't lose anybody major in the summer. But long term, the fact that they haven't really invested in the team for 2 years will catch up with them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, the modern football fan is a funny animal, I would say, because what you have is so much emphasis on the transfer window. And myself personally, I hate it. I can't wait till the season starts. I can't wait to talk about the real things, what goes on the pitch, the tactics, the dodgy decisions from VAR, all these sort of things I want to talk about. But, it's a massive part of the culture, I suppose, in football, isn't it? The transfers, you need to invest. And I look around Europe and I look at some of the signings people have made. And I just think that for the money being quoted, like Jamal Lewis is one of them, I think. I know Newcastle got him for 14 million. Young, British, homegrown, good player. I was just a bit puzzled why Liverpool haven't gone for them. Is it purely a financial reason? Or again, as you said, is it just that Klopp is waiting for, or the board are waiting for the right player? Because I've done a bit of reading, but Liverpool, do they rely heavily on sort of data analytics to purchase their players? Are you able to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a big part of what they do. And I think they're sort of widely considered to have the best data guys in the business, really, which has enabled them to get guys like Andy Robertson for 8 million, who nobody would have really thought of as being a good option. He played for Hull City and they got relegated, and then Liverpool picked him up on the cheap, and nobody had great expectations, but they'd obviously seen something in his abilities, and he's obviously come in and he's been brilliant for Liverpool. So yeah, they're very much rely upon the data and the sort of insight they can get from that. Obviously, the sort of term Moneyball gets bandied about a lot. I'm not sure it's quite so much that. I think it's just sort of looking for value where they can get it. And yeah, so it sort of all feeds into sort of what we've said already, as in they don't have much money necessarily, and they tend to wait for their top targets. Obviously, I think Werner was their top target, and they passed on that because of the money involved, obviously, with the problems with sort of COVID and the lockdown and everything, and the money they're losing that way. But yeah, they put a huge emphasis on the data and the sort of insights they can get from that. There was a really interesting article in the New York Times with Ian Graham, who's the club's head of research. And he was basically talking about how he doesn't even sort of watch video of players because it biases his opinion. He'll just look at the numbers. And I'm not sure that's entirely the right way to go. I think somebody should take a look at these players before they sign them, and I'm sure they do. But they put a lot of faith into sort of statistical analysis and stuff like that. And you have to say that on the whole, in the last few years, it's worked for them. So I think that's why it should and it will continue, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the proof is in the pudding. One Champions League, first Premier League in 30 years. It's obviously working. You're doing something right. Well, as a United fan, I've done a lot of research into United's spending over the last 7 years. It's horrible reading. 1.2 billion. How many of them can you say has been a success? But in the last couple of years, United have gone through the same route of more of the data analytics, putting more emphasis on that. And you can actually see that, likes of Bruno coming in, Wan-Bissaka's an excellent 1v1 defender. It's starting to work, but I do think Liverpool in that respect are about 4 or 5 years ahead of the chasing pack. I spoke to someone who's in football finance, and he said that Leicester, Man City and Liverpool are the best at this when it comes to sort of data analytics. One more question about the ownership before I ask you about Thiago. I'm sure Liverpool fans are dying to hear about Thiago, but why is there this narrative that's going around with a few fans of FSG out? Because looking from the outside, they've turned a club around that was almost on the brink, I believe, of administration, or the money situation was terrible, obviously, under Hicks and Gillette, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they've come in, they've extended the stadium, the stand, I believe. So more revenues coming in. You've now got a bigger stadium. The commercial deals have obviously increased. You've won another Champions League for the 6th time. You've won another Premier League. Arguably last year, Liverpool was still the best team in Europe. They just obviously lost in that circumstances. Atletico. It was quite nice to watch, I'm sorry to say, but Liverpool clearly are currently one of the best teams in Europe. They're going to challenge next year for the Champions League, or challenge for the Premier League. These owners have done a phenomenal job. So why is it that there's fans out there saying FSG out? There's no ambition, because you've got the best manager in the world. You've got a great squad. The only way is up again.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't really understand it for the reasons that you've just said, really. I mean, everything they've achieved, from taking the club that was on the brink of administration 10 years ago, I think they came in 9 years ago, to where they are now, it's incredible. And I think, they're not perfect owners, but then nobody has perfect owners. But yeah, as you say, they've sort of won the 2 biggest trophies in the last 2 years. You see a lot of people on Twitter who will have FSG out in their Twitter bio or as their Twitter name or whatever. And yet they'll have a picture, their profile picture will be Klopp, or it'll be Virgil van Dijk, or it'll be Alisson Becker or whatever. And you sort of stop and think, well, who brought these people into the club? FSG brought these people in. Someone like Van Dijk, Liverpool weren't buying tons of world-class centre-backs before FSG came in. And now they've got one. Van Dijk was the most expensive defender in the world. Alisson was the most expensive goalkeeper. I mean, they've since been overtaken on that. But the point is, at the time, as they wanted. I think there's a thing with a lot of football fans, or some football fans will just never be happy. I think unless Liverpool win the league for the next 10 years, and they'll still find, something to grumble about. I think it's the nature of football fandom, certainly for some people. And I think there's too much emphasis, again, not all fans by any means, but almost winning, if you can call it that, winning the transfer market is better than winning games of football and winning the trophies. They want to say to their mates, oh, look, we've signed Thiago, or we've signed whoever it happens to be. You haven't signed anybody who's any good, or whatever. That sort of side of it is such a big thing for a lot of people these days. Generalizing hugely, but younger fans, I would imagine, than old farts like me or whatever. But yeah, it's strange. I don't really understand it. As I say, they're not perfect. They've certainly made mistakes. Trying to raise ticket prices and the furlough issue and things like that. So
sorry,
it's
Andy,
sort
you
of
just cut,
odd to criticize it now, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, you just cut out there for a little bit.
Cut out.
You're back now. No problem. Yeah, no problem. You now. But that's the generation, isn't it? It's what happens when you've got video games and people can go and buy whoever they want on a video game and they think that's real life. So no, I agree with everything you said there. Let's move on to Thiago. And what's the latest you've heard on him? Because I know that he's obviously interested in moving to Liverpool. He wants to play under Klopp. The issue again probably is the money. Do you fear that Liverpool could lose out on this just purely because it looks like the deal could hinge on Wijnaldum leaving and whether there's money that comes in for that? And obviously there'll be a space. So what's the latest on Thiago? And do you think he'll come in? Or do you think it'll just be a case of Wijnaldum staying as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I heard Klopp on Radio 5 earlier this week, and he was sort of dismissing all the transfer talk that's in the newspapers relating to Liverpool. But then he admitted that he believes it for other clubs, which is probably the nature of it. I mean, with regards to Thiago and Wijnaldum and what have you, I mean, the Swiss Ramble thing that we've already referred to, I mean, he said he thought Liverpool would have to sell to buy, just talking generally. But that would obviously suggest that Wijnaldum would have to leave if Thiago was going to come in. I think the Thiago one's interesting because he kind of goes against everything that Liverpool have done over the last few years. You know, they've tended to buy younger players with good injury records, bring them in on relatively low wages and then build them up, kind of reward them for the success. And obviously Thiago, a little bit older, a lot of injuries over the years, and he would obviously come in on a very big salary immediately. So I've kind of been a bit skeptical about it all summer, about whether it would actually happen. But I mean, there were so many stories that, you know, you have to think that the interest is genuine. I think that they would definitely move for him if Wijnaldum was to go. But if Wijnaldum doesn't go, I'm not sure that they would complete the deal, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. For me, though, when you're looking at a player of Thiago's caliber, I honestly think he's one of the best midfielders in Europe. He just pretty much led Bayern Munich to the European Cup. I just think that if Liverpool want a signing who's world-class, could take them to that next level in that midfield, it'd be frightening to see him playing and supplying those balls to that front three. So I'm a bit on the fence on what's going to happen. For me, I think he wants Liverpool, but I just can't see Liverpool being able to afford him unless obviously Wijnaldum leaves. It seems like Wijnaldum is obviously one of Klopp's go-to men. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think there's a lot of time left to see what happens with that deal. But let's move on to Klopp's comments about Chelsea spending. And there's a few reports coming out today that, you know, some people think this is, I wouldn't say beginning of the end, but they think, oh, this is not a good sign. Klopp's going into the season unhappy. What do you make of those comments? And are you a bit concerned, though, that Klopp's coming out with, he seems frustrated in the media?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I mean, his comments about Chelsea are probably just what, you know, a lot of people and a lot of clubs are thinking. And then, you know, headlines get written that he's having a pop at Chelsea. And he's, it sounded to me like he was just explaining some teams can spend a lot of money. And we as Liverpool are sort of restricted a bit because of, you know, the financial uncertainty at the moment. He sort of referred to the change, what they're doing. You know, they've got a system that works for them. So, you know, I don't think anything he said was wrong necessarily. It was mostly just a sort of statement of fact. Liverpool can't spend these huge sums, whereas teams like Chelsea can, and that's just sort of the reality of it. I think he's a good manager for FSG and sort of Liverpool's system because he's generally okay with that. At least that's the way it seems. You know, he's always been happy to give young players a chance. sort of went, no, it isn't. But he was happy to work with the guys that he had, and he sort of built up the team from there. So, he's probably a good manager for Liverpool from that point of view as well. But I'm sure he does have his frustrations. But I think what he was saying about Chelsea is pretty much just how it is, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, no one can really compete with what Chelsea are doing. Their business model is different to the likes of United and Liverpool. We have to remember that no fans is a big hit on clubs like United and Liverpool, who have huge match day revenue as well. So when you're looking over at Chelsea, their business model is different. They've got a very rich owner. They also sell very well. They've got a year, technically, of spending to do. So with all that said, what are your expectations for the? Do you expect Liverpool to retain the title, or are you a little bit nervous going into it?
I wouldn't say I'm nervous. I mean, equally, I don't think you can expect to retain the title because the competition is going to be fierce. Obviously, Manchester City are going to fight back. Chelsea and United should be better than they were last season. I mean, United finished well, but I mean, across the whole season, United should be better. Tottenham and Arsenal will improve. I'm not sure they'll make up that much of a difference. I think it'll be the other four that finish in the top four spots. I mean, with regards to Liverpool, they were very good last season in the close games. They won 14 games by 1 goal, and it doesn't take a lot for a few of those to go against you, and you drop a few points and stuff like that. I don't think Liverpool are going to sort of fall away massively, but those sort of small margins, might start going against them. Who can say? I think when you look back over the history of the Premier League, it's quite hard for teams to be incredibly strong for 3 seasons in a row. We saw City fall away last season, and it's been the same throughout the Premier League. No Premier League team has ever got 88 points for 3 seasons in a row. And obviously, if Liverpool are going to win the league again, they're going to have to do that. You would imagine probably more than that. So after getting 97 points, 99 points, if they get 88 points again, they'll have done something that nobody has done, whether they win the league or not. And I think they're capable of sort of getting that amount. It's just whether they can keep winning the games with these sort of small margins, win by the odd goal. Had a lot of 2-1 wins last season. And I think, they'll be helped if Alisson Becker can stay fit, because he missed quite a lot of games last season. A lot of those 2-1s were where Adrian was in goal. He let in some sort of goals you would have expected Alisson to save and stuff like that. So I certainly expect Liverpool to compete for the title. I don't think you can assume they'll win it because it's just too difficult. But I certainly think they'll be in the mix again. Yeah, I'd be surprised if they weren't first or second.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a prediction yesterday, and I've just pipped City, but that again depends on if they can get Koulibaly in. But it's going to be Liverpool and City, and then the rest. I think the gap will be closed between the top 2 and the rest. But I can't see past those 2 teams really, to be honest with you. They're definitely the strongest. Let's move on to the final question, Andrew, and the predictions for the game against Leeds. This is a box office game. What a great game for Leeds to come up to after years out of the Premier League. And Bielsa is a fantastic manager, as we all know. He's got his Leeds team playing. The system is just fantastic. So what do you predict for this game? Do you think Liverpool are going to pip it, or are you expecting it to be fairly routine for them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting game. We've got sort of 2 counter-pressing teams. Leeds comfortably the best team in the Championship last season, and they were very strong away from home. They didn't concede too many goals. I had a look earlier. They only conceded more than once in 5 of their away games. Now, obviously, Premier League is going to be tougher, and Liverpool are going to be tougher than your average Premier League team. But clearly, Leeds are a very good side. I don't have any sort of concerns that they're going to go down. I think they'll stay up comfortably, probably finish sort of mid-table. In terms of tomorrow, my initial sort of gut instinct was that it was going to be a 2-0 home win. And so then I looked it up with the bookmakers, and that's what they've got as the favourite for the correct score as well. And, they're not always right on correct score bets, but they tend to know what they're talking about. So I think something like 2-0, I think Liverpool should win. Obviously, they're beaten at home now for 3 years in the league, over 3 years. So Liverpool should win, but I don't think they'll run away with it. And I think Leeds will be a very good team this year, and probably pick up some results which might surprise a few people along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're my dark horses for the season. I could easily see them finishing top half and, perhaps something like 8th, even 7th. I think they're going to be good next year. They've signed, well, this season even, they've signed Rodrigo. I think that's some quality. If they can get someone like Draxler in, which has been the reports going around, and that's fantastic for them. I'm going to ask you one last question. What's your top 4 predictions and what's your relegation predictions?
Top 4 will, I think, be Liverpool, City, Chelsea, United. Hopefully in that order would be good. I'd take that. But I certainly think they're clearly the 4 best teams. They were last season, and I've not seen anything to suggest Tottenham and Arsenal are going to close the gap. Obviously, unless some mad transfers come out in the next 3 weeks. But as it stands, I think that'd be the top 4. Relegation, I'm going to say Fulham and West Brom, I think, are both going to struggle. Beyond that, it's always hard because there's quite a few teams that will be in the mix. I think Newcastle were pretty bad on the statistics last season. They could struggle. Aston Villa stayed up, but they only had 35 points. And any team that stayed up with 35 points before has got relegated the following season. Which suggests they'll struggle. And I think Crystal Palace are going to be in trouble because they got an aging squad. And, particularly if Zaha leaves as he wants to, I sort of see them struggling for goals. So if I had to pick, I think of those, I will probably say Palace. So I'll go Fulham, West Brom, Palace as the 3 to go down. But as I say, teams like Villa and Newcastle, I would expect to sort of struggle as well.
Yeah, it's a great shout. I've got West Ham down because I think they're in disarray. Mm-hmm. They're a mess. I spoke to a West Ham fan the other day on the podcast, and he was saying that, the money situation is not great over there. The squad are unhappy. Moyes is probably on thin ice. So that's definitely one to look out for. But Andrew, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And just tell the listeners where they can find you on Twitter or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, Twitter's probably the best place. My username is basetunetored, or if you search Andrew Beasley, I'll probably come up anyway on football or whatever. Anything I write, I share on there. So yeah, if people want to see what I'm sort of up to, I guess a lot of your viewers are probably United fans, so maybe they don't, but that's all right. So find me on Twitter, and anything I write will be going on there, definitely.
Great stuff. And to all the listeners, make sure you give a like and a subscribe. Let's get this video out to more people. It's been great talking to Andrew. It's nice talking and having a decent United, fan and Liverpool fan conversation. That's not always the case. But thank you very much for coming on again, Andrew. And we'll see you next time.
No worries at all.